There's a famous scene in Charlie Kaufman's movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind where Jim Carrey's character Joel confronts his ex-girlfriend Clementine in a bookstore. "What's wrong with your phone?" he mumbles. Clementine turns and smiles a professional smile at him.
"Excuse me? Can I help you find something, sir?"
Later, a heartbroken Joel turns to his friends for support.
And she looks at me like she doesn't even know who I am.
After initially trying to comfort him and urging him to move on, Joel's friends are ultimately compelled to tell him the news of Clementine's recent procedure. She's had him erased from her memory completely. Now some experts say Charlie Kaufman's fictional tale of brain editing is set to become a future reality.
We're starting to see healthcare move beyond the four walls of the hospital.
Just go over to your 3D printer and print out the drug that you need.
In 2050, I get customized medications tailored to my molecular genetic makeup.
How will the system bear these costs?
What it has done is it has brought the C word, cure, into the dialogue of cancer.
I'm Carlos Watson, editor-in-chief of OZY, and this is The Future of X, a podcast that vaults you forward 50 years to explore a world that's awe-inspiring and maybe a little bit frightening, whether it be the future of music, farming, or dating in space. Our first season, in partnership with Providence St. Joseph Health, looks into something that touches every one of us, the future of health. Today, we're exploring a facet of healthcare that's essential to our well-being, mental health. And to get there, in this episode, we're going to do something special. We're going to start in the future and work our way back to the present. First, we'll catapult ourselves to the distant future when we'll really be able to delete mental illness from our brains altogether. But before scientific innovation can lead to brain editing, we'll first need to gather and analyze our brain's data. In our previous episode, we talked about digital tattoos tracking our physical health through electronic skin sensors that monitor blood pressure and hydration. Think of neural implants doing the same thing, but for the mind. They can anticipate symptoms associated with mental illness before you feel them. Finally, we'll work our way back to what's happening in the present day. We'll speak to Arianna Huffington, who founded the Huffington Post, but literally ran herself into the ground, cheekbone first. She was like a third of Americans who don't get enough sleep. Now she's a mental health advocate with the new wellness startup, Thrive Global, which aims in part to send us all to sleep. Now, appropriately, I want you to close your eyes and time travel with us to a world far, far away.
You cut your hair.
Nope.
You lost weight.
Huh, I wish.
New dress?
You saw me in this last week.
Oh my God, you didn't.
I did.
Did it hurt?
Nope. Snip, snip. I was out in a day.
And now?
Remember when you used to go on a long trip and your car got gross? You know, fries between the seats, dirt and gunk everywhere. And then you went to the car wash and you spent that extra $10 on the works. When you got back in, it was like a brand new car.
Totally.
It's like that for your brain.
And so now you don't think about her anymore?
Don't think about who?
When we talk about neurotechnology, it could mean simply mapping your brain activity or stimulating it with magnetic pulses. But in its most extreme form, neurotechnology can mean uploading a copy of your entire brain to a machine. Think about it like this. Let's say you have 1,000 photos on your phone and you want to upload them to the cloud. 1,000 photos is about 2 gigabytes. Most of us are looking at a 10 megabit per second link speed. So some simple math means those 1,000 photos will take about a half an hour to upload. The average human has about 86 billion neurons in their brain, each with complex information, much like a digital photo. So at that same link speed, uploading those 86 billion neurons to the cloud would take more than 5,000 years. It's clearly not possible yet, but some futurists hold out hope that neurotechnology will one day rid us of depression and other mental illnesses. You'd visit a neurologist who would scan your brain and upload its activity to a computer. The doctor would then assess which parts of the brain your depression, anxiety, or mental illness symptoms are linked to, but then they would deactivate it or repress it right there on the screen. And here's where it gets funky. Making an edit to the computer version of your brain would be the same as making an edit to your actual brain, because the two would be interconnected, wired together. Mind blown. But first, there's a lot more work to be done.
First, we need to better understand the neural circuits that are responsible for those kinds of, let's say, mental states or diseases, so that we can know what is the circuitry, where do we need to intervene in the circuitry exactly in order to put the system in a better state.
To understand how neurotechnology works, we spoke to E.J. Chichelniski, lead researcher at the Stanford Neurotechnology Initiative.
In the future, the hope is that we will understand how the neural circuits are working well enough that we can do more than that. Rather than just sort of hit a reset button or give the system a big jolt, we can delicately manipulate the system in order to put things in a better state. And I think that's going to be relevant for everything from what we're doing, so providing artificial sensations, to controlling devices and paralyzed people, to, as you said, treating more, let's say, in the middle aspects of how we think and how in our emotions.
Clearly, there are many moral and ethical concerns around editing the brain. If you start tinkering with your basic drives and dispositions, there could be unintended consequences.
I always wanted to look at the experience of being neurodiverse as a blessing. It comes along with a lot of creative elements.
That's Joshua Walters, a bipolar comedian and mental health advocate who embraces the symptoms of his diagnosis like hypomania. And he's not alone. Some experts say we risk taking away people's ability to see the world in a truly unique way.
This kind of sub-manic state where people have an enormous amount of energy and confidence and drive and charisma and creativity is often found in entrepreneurs and people who are very creative in the arts and people who are starting new social movements.
That's psychiatrist John D. Gartner. In his book, The Hypomanic Edge, he points out that America has the highest rate of diagnosed bipolar disorder, with nearly 1 in 20 Americans on the bipolar spectrum, almost double the global average. Gartner ties the high rate to immigration, citing that immigrants are more likely to be ambitious, optimistic, and creative, and more likely to have bipolar disorder. He suggests that because America has a higher proportion of hypomanics, they've helped shape the country's character and success.
And so this temperament actually has a lot of really positive value. Actually, I think with all of these psychological traits that have adaptive components, they're all double-edged swords. So, for example, people with this temperament tend to be very impatient, very irritable, very impulsive, and then there's also just a quality of inner peace that seems to elude people with this temperament because they're constantly driven, and once they achieve something, then they just move the goalposts and they have to move on to something else.
The trick, says Gartner, is to find out how to properly manage the symptoms of mental illness so people who exhibit some positive symptoms don't lose the traits that make them unique.
I've actually found using meditation is actually an effective way to help people self-regulate without having to use as much medication. I often say more meditation means less medication because medication is a blunt instrument. And so if you're going to dampen down someone's excesses, you're also going to reduce their drive and their creativity and their confidence and a lot of their sort of secret sauce that makes them successful.
One day, we might be able to deactivate the part of our brain that causes us to feel depressed and anxious or that causes mental illness like bipolar. But should we? Later on in the plot of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Joel, in a dreamlike state, has an imagined conversation with Clementine. "Why did you do it?" he asks of her memory-deleting procedure.
"You know me, I'm impulsive."
Herein lies the dilemma. If brain editing does become a reality, who should be given the power to decide to use it? Doctors? Patients? The heartbroken? Those are all questions to be answered eventually. Okay, let's do a quick sanity check. How are you feeling right now? Are you stressed? Overwhelmed? Are you feeling a bit anxious about work or a family member? While we can't delete those feelings just yet, there may be a more imminent technology that can help.
From my perspective, I really do see it as like eventually a sort of visual dashboard that's consistently giving people feedback and, different language data or picking up on different things that is, helping guide people as they're progressing through life.
Q. Glenn Moriarty, founder of the mental health app 7 Cups, which provides anonymous emotional support and counseling 24/7. We may not have neural implants yet, but we do have apps that can do many of the things Moriarty is talking about.
We have a separate app, digital phenotyping app called 7 Cups Ears, which is effortless assessment of risk states. And there are, word classifiers. So if you're, at risk, you might be more likely to use certain words, or your phone usage patterns might be off. So, as an example, you might be using your phone later at night or earlier in the morning, which is just off of your normal sleep schedule.
Arpan Wagre, Chief Medical Officer for Wellbeing Trust and the System Director of Telepsychiatry for Providence St. Joseph Health, explains how the touch of a screen can tell us a lot.
I think the biggest revolution and the biggest change that will probably come will be through the digital space and in a concept called digital phenotyping. People have 26 to 2,700 touches on their cell phone every day. We can now have a way in which we can objectively and continuously monitor for certain symptoms and get people help very early.
Think about that for a second. We touch our cell phones on average 2,700 times each and every day.
There's so many things that would help us gain a much more objective way in which we can understand how people are doing. It would be prudent for us to put in place measures where we're actually continuously monitoring them. What we really want to be able to monitor and assess is how are you doing in the real world continuously.
Technology like this comes at a critical time. The suicide rate in the U.S. hit a 50-year peak in 2017, according to the CDC. Imagine you're prone to anxiety. Your neural implant tracks your serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. But more than that, it also tracks your response to the article you just read about political gridlock. And it records the effects of the disparaging email your coworker sent earlier that day and the reaction you had to your late-night playlist. And so it sends a notification to your therapist. Now might be a good time for them to check in. But if people are being constantly monitored, another familiar concern pops up: privacy. Arpan Wagre again.
When do you shift from measurement to surveillance? While I definitely support the idea that we're going to have to do so much more, we also need to be acutely aware of that balance and make sure that people, never compromise on what matters to people the most.
Plus, if we're constantly using tech to help our mental health, won't we spend less time connecting with each other? Human connection has been proven to decrease depression. How do we find a balance?
We're talking about technology as a solution for mental health, but I have many conversations with parents where they tell me that they feel that technology is actually the problem for their teens and tweens and younger people. So how do we make sure that we're actually finding that balance? We're helping people get the care they need. We're not talking about technology solutions as a substitute for human connection.
Dry erase markers.
Hey, babe.
2 packs, yellow
Yeah, I'm
label
getting
paper.
supplies. Apparently, I have an episode coming on next week. I know. It feels like I
3
just
packs,
had one.
colored pens, 12-pack metal replacement
I'm
fabric.
excited too.
Strawberry.
If I nail down the financial models quickly, that will give me enough time to finish the market research and put the finishing touches on my presentation. I should probably set a reminder to take a break after that for lunch. You know how I get.
1 pack flip chart paper.
That reminds me, can you set my outgoings to hypomania auto-reply? And I won't be able to make dinner with Molly and Leah next week. That's when my tracker says I'll be the most hypomanic.
1 pack clear response digital dopamine test.
Thanks, babe. I can already feel the creative juices flowing again. I can tell it's going to be a good one.
1 puzzle world map 40,000 pieces.
Today, in 2019, mental illness is more common than you might think. According to the National Alliance on Mental Health, 1 in 5 American adults is affected. It turns out that the steps we take today are defining how we get to the future we've been talking about. Arianna Huffington, co-founder of the Huffington Post website, was the quintessential workaholic, constantly putting in long, relentless hours at the office, getting just a few hours of sleep each night. She was sleep-deprived, exhausted, and burned out. In 2007, 2 years into starting HuffPo, Huffington collapsed and broke her cheekbone. She literally ran herself into the ground. She was diagnosed with exhaustion.
And this was the beginning of my examining not just what had happened in my life, but what was happening around the world, and realizing that burnout was a silent pandemic.
So Huffington decided to leave her company and launch Thrive Global, a startup that promotes healthy sleep and tech habits and aims to help change stress-inducing behavior.
Chronic sleep problems are found in 10 to 18% of the overall US population, but they are found in 50 to 80% of those seeking help for mental health issues. So sleep deprivation always predisposes us to rumination, to negative bias, to those things that, if they're not arrested, become depression and anxiety.
When it comes to maintaining your mental health, experts agree that sleep can have a huge impact on your mood, energy, and productivity. Lack of sleep is a serious destabilizing condition. Last year, the University of Pennsylvania found that 1/4 of Americans experience insomnia each year. But what if we're thinking about sleep all wrong? What if instead of trying to get more sleep, we could hack our bodies to need less? Within our DNA, there's a gene known as DEC2, which helps control and maintain wakefulness. But for some people, a mutation in this gene causes them to naturally need fewer hours of sleep each night. In 2009, neurology professor Ying-Wei Fu from the University of San Francisco discovered the DEC2 mutation in a mother and daughter who both regularly needed just 6 hours of sleep each night compared to the recommended 8 hours. They're part of a very small percentage of people classified as naturally short sleepers while being perfectly healthy.
So what these people are telling us is that it is possible for humans to be this way. Somehow their genetic makeup wire their body to sleep efficiently so that they can defy conventional thinking and plenty of scientific evidence to be that way.
Last year, Fu and her team completed more research on DEC2 and discovered that it normally ensures that orexin, the wakefulness hormone, is expressed at the right levels. But in people who have the mutation, DEC2 causes more orexin production, keeping them awake longer.
So those people who sleep 4 to 6 hours per night their entire life, they're happy, energetic, and from what we can tell, they're pretty healthy. Not because they sleep much less than everybody else. No. They're happy, energetic, and healthy. Most likely because they always get their good night's sleep. It just so happened that for them, it only takes 4 to 6 hours a night.
In addition to the lack of sleep, a lot of cases are triggered by lifestyle. Arianna Huffington.
Paradoxically, we are more digitally connected than ever before, and we are more disconnected in terms of deep human connections, which is what every human being craves.
Arpan Wagre of Wellbeing Trust takes it a step further. He thinks that we're looking at mental illness all wrong.
When we talk about physical health, what comes to your mind? You talk about wellness, you talk about all kinds of things that go with physical health, exercise and all this stuff. When you talk about mental health, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? All these illnesses. So we want to be very careful in how we're framing this. We do not want people who are suffering from true mental illnesses to feel that it's a sign of moral weakness.
Today, some people who suffer from mental illness are often treated with medication as a first resort. But John D. Gartner, the psychiatrist who we heard from earlier, thinks that should change.
These are the drugs that they actually make the most money on. It's their biggest profit centers. They charge a fortune for them. They're $1,000 a month, and it's overkill. It's sort of like I say, using chemotherapy for a cold.
The way we think about mental illness has changed a lot. Did you know that until 1973, homosexuality was considered a mental illness by the American Psychiatric Association? Thankfully, more than 45 years later, our perception is different. But some think it should change even further. Gartner again.
The default option should be that we should respect who people are.
As we heard earlier, Gartner and Joshua Walters see a lot of good in some of the symptoms linked to bipolar disorder, like hypomania, and believe we need to change our minds about mental illness. In the future, conditions like this could become so destigmatized that they'll no longer be considered mental illness at all.
Well, I think something that's coming up in the future is just how we see labels in general. Much of being a peer supporter and someone with a condition, someone with lived experience, is you don't really use somebody else's label, or you don't use labels. You say, I have lived experience, I have a condition, and you might not go into the story or like your explicit diagnoses, but you say, I have a similar experience.
Because so many people suffer from mental illness, we're learning more about the diverse mental traits associated with it while still safely managing the bad parts through therapy, meditation, and properly prescribed medication. In the future, however, neurotechnology could become so powerful that we will edit or delete the parts of our brains that cause depression and mental illness. And before that, we could have neural implants that track our chemical balances, but that's a long way off. Besides, maybe it's really a lot more simple. Ariana Huffington again.
Because of the conversation we're having now around artificial intelligence and the millions of jobs it's going to destroy, but also the millions of jobs it's going to create, more and more people are recognizing the need to develop the distinctly human qualities that AI cannot replace: empathy, compassion, love.
Okay, you might be sensing a theme here. In episode 1 of this series, the former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy talked about the importance of human connection for staving off an epidemic of loneliness. In episode 2, the same thing. Doctors and healthcare costs will be guided by tech, but still driven by humans. When it comes to our mental well-being, even 50 years from now, with new technologies that track and analyze our brains like never before, we'll still need to rely on each other. I'm your host, Carlos Watson. Thank you for joining us on The Future of X. This series is a partnership between OZY and Providence St. Joseph Health. On the next episode of The Future of X Health, we'll discuss the one thing in our lives none of us will ever escape, and I'm not talking about taxes. What does the future of dying look like when all disease is eradicated? Turns out, when we bring in psychedelic-assisted therapies, it looks pretty damn fun. Hallucinogenically speaking, of course. The Future of X is produced by OZY in partnership with Providence St. Joseph Health. I'm your host, Carlos Watson. Leah Rose is our producer. Molly Fosco and Sean Braswell are the editorial producers. The show was edited and mixed by Chris Kim. Rob Kulos is our executive producer, and Faye Schlesinger serves as managing editor. For more on The Future of X, go to ozy.com/future. That's ozy.com/future.